Hey guys, tonight we slip behind the smoky shutters of a medieval tailor shop, where iron needles glint in the firelight. The wool smells like a wet sheep that's just been judged by God, and everything from your neckline to your shoelaces screams your social rank, whether you like it or not. You're not here just to get fitted for a new doublet. No. Tonight you're stepping into a world where clothes speak volumes, and sometimes whisper secrets nobody should hear. Imagine the heat of the room, the kind that comes not from the hearth, but from the press of too many bodies. Too little soap, and the slow boil of ambition. Bolts of cloth hang like flags of unspoken alliances. Pins bite your fingers. And somewhere beneath the bench, a rat considers joining the tailoring guild itself. You probably won't survive this. If the vermin don't get you, the sumptuary laws might. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, pop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little candlelight community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're an apprentice, barely past your 15th birthday, still unsure which side of the shears is for cutting and which is for bleeding. Your master, Master Henrik, is half blind, but can spot uneven stitching from 3 yards away. He's muttering something about a hem while biting off a thread with his teeth. Again, hygiene isn't a strong suit in this century. Tailoring isn't glamorous. It's work done hunched and collused. You wake to the scrape of wool, the stink of boiled piss, a key ingredient in cleaning fabrics, by the way, and the endless clatter of wooden clogs. Clients parade in with ambitions far too large for their coin purses, and you learn quickly that the art of tailoring is as much about diplomacy as it is about darts and seams. But it's also power. Real power. Because in a time when a person could be burned at the stake for impersonating nobility, tailors knew how to dress a body in lies. You've heard it whispered. A tailor in Bruges sewed hidden pouches into a nobleman's cloak that held forged letters. The nobleman died in disgrace. The tailor vanished. Some say into a monastery, others say into the tower. Either way, the stitches told the story long after the man was gone. You trail your fingers across a bolt of fustian. Thick, rough stuff, but good for keeping warm. Not noble enough for a knight, not plain enough for a monk. Henrik sees your hesitation. Look again. He growls. That there's for a merchant, one who wants to look richer than he is. And there it is, the core of medieval tailoring, making someone look just enough like something they're not to get away with it. But not too much. That's where the danger lies. Across town, the bishop's tailor is constructing yet another cope, and everyone knows he's padding the bill with gold thread that doesn't exist. Doesn't matter. The bishop likes the shimmer, and no one checks the inside of holy vestments. Tailors are clever like that. They understand which lies shimmer, and which ones stain. The tools of the trade are as sharp as the reputations that hang on their points. Shears the size of a toddler, needles finer than a cobweb, wax, chalk, awls, pins. A good tailor knows how to use them all, especially the chalk, which carries secrets of its own. You learn to mark the grain of the fabric, but also to leave symbols only other tailors understand. A crooked cross for a client who cheats, a looped s for one who smells. Tailors are craftsmen, yes, but also gatekeepers, gossips, and quiet rebels. Their shops are crossroads of the known world. Silks from Venice, dyes from Baghdad, linen from Flanders. Each carries a story. Each could start a war or prevent one. You sew in silence, save for Henrik's occasional curses and the drone of the city outside. Every so often, someone important passes, judging not by faces but by fabric. Blue for the burghers, green for the guildsmen, scarlet for the truly brave or the truly rich. You wonder what they see when they look at you, apprentice in undyed wool, with hands already collused and a mind starting to stitch its own questions. One day, Henrik shows you a doublet that belonged to a knight. The fabric is stiff with dried sweat and something darker. He died in this, Henrik says, not unkindly. They want it cleaned and mended. For his son. You work in silence, your fingers tracing ghost lines of battle. You find a hole, tiny, like a spider's bite, just beneath the armpit. A crossbow bolt, maybe. Or a dagger, slipped close in a brawl. History's wound, hidden in cloth. Henrik doesn't say anything, but he watches you closely. Historians still argue whether tailors were just passive observers or silent co-conspirators in history's big moves. But you're starting to see the thread goes where the tailor sends it, and some seams are meant never to be opened again. The candle gutters low, and Henrik finally grunts his approval. Your stitch is held. You clean your tools, hang the doublet with quiet reverence, and feel, just for a moment, that history brushed its fingers against yours. You're up before the sun, stretching your aching arms as the workshop yawns back to life. Today, you're learning the art of measuring. And no, not with your hands. That would be far too intimate for the stiff codes of medieval modesty. Instead, tailors rely on strings, sticks, and an uncanny knack for reading the body through layers of linen and ego. Master Henrik shows you a long strip of parchment, marked with careful notches. Don't touch the client, he says sharply. Use the string. Use your eyes. And he's right. One wrong graze, one unasked hand on a noble thigh, and suddenly, you're not measuring for a new tunic. You're measuring your sentence in the stocks. The client today is a wealthy merchant named Godefroy, who insists he's a direct descendant of Charlemagne, despite looking more like a boiled turnip in a fur hat. He lifts his arms dramatically, revealing a faint but pungent aroma of cured meat and pride. Something dignified, he says, but fashionable. Nothing too clerical. You hold the measuring string carefully, dancing it across his chest, around his belly, just above a suspiciously lumpy belt pouch, and down to his knees. No eye contact. No chatter. And when he turns, you catch sight of the padding, linen scraps stuffed into the shoulders and chest, clearly meant to make him look broader, bolder, more knightly. This is common. You're learning that medieval fashion is part theater, part illusion. Tailors don't just sew garments, they sculpt identities. And sometimes, the identities are wishful thinking stuffed with straw. Henrik once whispered that a baron's wife came in padded not just in the usual places, but with coins sewn into her hem to make her walk look more regal. The trick backfired when she fainted from heat during Vespers. Too much dignity, not enough airflow, Henrik said with a shrug. But not all padding is deception. Some is survival. You help fit a farmer's daughter later in the day, her tunic unusually thick at the elbows and back. She explains, shyly, that the extra cloth is for protection during field work. Henrik says nothing, but his hands are gentler as he adjusts the folds. Not all tailoring is about status. Some is armor, against the cold, the hard ground, the world. Still, measuring remains an art wrapped in discomfort. You work around physical quirks, scars, body odor, and pride. Some clients insist they're thinner than they are, and you're expected to measure their delusion as respectfully as their waist. The measuring stick, you learn, is sometimes deliberately wrong. Henrik has one for real measurements, one for flattery. Guess which one he uses on the wealthy. Let them think they've slimmed. He mutters, smoothing a line of chalk, makes the fitting easier, and the purse heavier. And here's the secret. Tailors don't just measure the body. They measure the mind. The way someone flinches when you mention a broader hem. The tilt of the chin when you offer a longer sleeve. Every request, every twitch, tells you who they think they are and who they desperately want to be. There's a tailor's proverb you hear whispered over a tankard one night. Tell me your inseam, and I'll tell you your sins. Probably a joke. But also, probably not. Later that week, a monk comes in for a new habit. He's gaunt, with eyes that have seen too many midnight candles and not enough roast goose. His only request a hood that drapes well, to hide his thinning hair. Henrik obliges without a word, but as the monk leaves, he murmurs, God sees through hoods, but monks don't need to know that. Historians still argue whether tailors truly understood their psychological influence. Did they exploit vanity, or merely serve it? Were they passive servants or discreet puppeteers? But you can see it clearly now, in the curve of every back, the flush of every cheek, as the string tightens across flesh and ego. You're starting to get good at this. You recognize who wants to look rich, who wants to look thin, who wants to vanish entirely. One day, a young squire comes in with bruises hidden under his undershirt and asks for a tunic with longer sleeves. You nod, don't ask questions, and make sure the cloth is thick enough to hide more than just skin. And then there are the peculiar requests. Make it snug, says a widow with eyes like flint. I want him to regret ever seeing me in it. Or the traveling musician who wants a codpiece so extravagant it threatens public decency and nearby crockery. Artistic license, he claims, while winking at your master. Henrik mutters something about needing stronger thread. Your tools are simple but sacred now. You carry the string, the chalk, the parchment. You learn to hum softly while measuring, so clients don't focus on how close your hands are. You learn that silence is sometimes more powerful than politeness. And over time, you begin to see the deeper language of measurement, the way fabric responds to breath. How every garment begins not with scissors but with listening. You measure not just a body, but a moment in that person's life. And sometimes, just sometimes, you wonder what they'd measure if they turned the string on you. You're snipping cloth beneath the window light, your fingers steady now, your cuts clean. Master Henrik watches without a word, only nodding slightly when the line you slice follows the grain just so. This is the real test. Not measuring, not stitching, but cutting. Because once cloth is cut, there's no going back. One wrong slice, and you're suddenly turning a nobleman's tunic into a peasant's apron. And in this world, the cut isn't just technical. It's political. It's moral. It's scandalous, sometimes. Because medieval society doesn't just see clothing as protection from weather or exposure. No, it reads it like scripture. Take hose, for instance. Men's hose is tight, very tight. So tight, in fact, that church sermons occasionally rant about how scandalously sinful it is to see every curve and crease of a man's anatomy outlined like a chapel carving. Some tailors stitch the hose directly to the doublet, creating a kind of fashion harness. One wrong move, and you're both undressed and possibly excommunicated. You cut along the lines Henrik drew, watching how each piece begins to resemble nothing at all, and yet holds the blueprint for a social identity. A sleeve isn't just a sleeve. Its width says how much you can afford in cloth tax. Its length says whether you work with your hands or order people who do. Its fabric, well, that's practically your family tree. You're fitting a young page now, barely older than you, but with that snotty, aristocratic tilt to his chin. And Henrik explains, quietly, he wants to look like his lord. But not too much, else the lord might notice. Because here's the catch: fashion is full of traps. If you dress too high above your station, you risk the wrath of sumptuary laws, regulations that dictate who can wear what, often in excruciating detail. Velvet for nobility, silk for royalty, fur for clergy, sometimes. Depending on the fur. There's a story Henrik loves to tell: a miller's wife who wore squirrel fur on her cuffs and got fined enough to buy a new mule. Should have stuck with sheepskin, he says. Mules don't judge. You chuckle, but you're starting to grasp how clothing itself becomes a trap. Too plain, and you're overlooked. Too fine, and you're punished. Tailors walk this threadbare tightrope daily, offering clients just enough illusion to flatter, never so much as to tempt the authorities. But sometimes, that balance is deliberately pushed. One day, a mysterious man arrives in the workshop. He wears a long cloak and speaks little, But when he removes his outer garment, you see he wants a cotehardie, a close, fitting tunic, cut in a way you've only ever seen in paintings of courtly love, slashed sleeves, high hem, low neckline. Provocative, flirtatious, expensive. The man. Not any of those things. Henrik doesn't blink. He cuts the fabric silently, but you catch the twitch of his eyebrow. Later, as you sweep up scraps, he mutters, "That man's not dressing for himself. He's dressing for someone watching." Historians still argue whether cuts and styles were ever deliberately used to challenge authority, or simply drifted into fashion like leaves on the wind. But you're there. You see the careful curve of the neckline, the slightly exaggerated taper of the waist. That cut is sending a message, and it's not polite. Sometimes people want a garment that says what they can't. Defiance, seduction, power. Even mourning. A widow might request a tunic cut tighter than mourning laws allow. Just enough to show she still breathes under all that black. A knight might want extra padding in the chest, not for vanity, but to conceal a broken rib. The way a garment is cut can reshape a man's silhouette or a woman's fortunes. And then there's the fashion for dagging, cutting fabric edges into shapes like leaves, scallops, or even flames. Totally impractical. Frivolous. Popular among the young and bored. Henrik despises it. West of Goodwool, he grumbles. You're not a forest sprite. You're a brewer's apprentice. You practice dagging in secret, late at night, carefully trimming scraps into jagged edges and trying not to slice your thumb off. There's something magical about it. How a piece of cloth becomes something other. Something playful, even rebellious. You think about the page boy who blushed when you offered him a slightly flared cuff. He liked it. He'll get in trouble for it. He'll wear it anyway. Clothing speaks louder than anyone admits. The way a collar flares, the way a bodice cinches, and especially the hose. Always the hose. A courier passes through town wearing hose that match in color. Unusual. Expensive. Matching hose means you bought the cloth whole, not secondhand. It means you didn't have to dye two legs separately. It says, I matter, even if your job is mostly saddle sores and bad weather. You've started to notice these things too. Who wears what? How it fits. The way tailors nudge fashion forward by a millimeter. Just enough to avoid punishment, but enough to set a new trend in motion. Cut by cut, you learn that fashion is never still. It shifts like water, like wind. Every sleeve, every pleat, carries meaning. And sometimes, it's your shears that start the storm. The dye room is its own strange little kingdom. You descend into it like a pilgrim entering a temple. Except the incense here is less frankincense and more fermented cabbage meets dirty socks. Welcome to the alchemy of color. You already know color is more than decoration. It's declaration. Wearing the wrong hue in the wrong place can get you fined, shunned, or even, if you're spectacularly unlucky, beheaded. You breathe through your mouth as Master Henrik lifts a wooden bucket of what looks like soup but smells like revenge. Indigo? He says simply. Imported, pricey. Clients think it comes from heaven, smells like hell, and yet people will kill, well, certainly lie, for these dyes. Deep blue for wealth, crimson for royalty. Black, paradoxically, for mourning and affluence, depending on how rich your grief is. You reach for a bundle of damp wool that's just emerged from a vat of madder root, glowing like fresh blood. You can't help but whisper, it looks alive. Henrik laughs. It better be. That color costs more than your shoes. You spend the morning hanging dyed cloth to dry, careful not to drip the colors onto other fabrics. A single spot of wood on undyed linen can ruin the illusion of modesty, and maybe get a priest curious. Later, a customer enters the shop, a merchant's wife with sharp eyes, and a purse even sharper. She wants something subtly scandalous, which is a real genre of fashion, apparently. No reds, she says, glancing over her shoulder. But something that says I could wear red, if I wanted to. Henrik offers a muted burgundy, madder root and oak bark. He murmurs, as if reading a wine label. The woman nods, satisfied. You realize color is also subtext. Red is passion. Burgundy is restraint flavored with passion. And all of it's governed by an unspoken rule book, thicker than a monk's guilt. Sumptuary laws, those famous medieval rules about who can wear what, are everywhere. In your town, only nobility can wear scarlet. Only clergy can wear purple. Green is a gray area. And don't even think about saffron unless you're a baron or feeling particularly rebellious. But there's always a loophole. Henrik shows you a garment dyed with elderberries. It looks purple. Kind of. But technically, it's not the forbidden purple made from Mediterranean murex shells. It's local. Cheaper. Legally ambiguous, you smile. You love a good fashion loophole. There's a story in the Guild of a Tailor who dyed a whole cloak with lichens to create a gold-green shimmer. The effect was mesmerizing. The bishop accused the wearer of witchcraft. The tailor insisted it was natural pigment. Historians still argue whether the tailor intended to provoke a scandal or just had a weird thing for moss. You study the dye pots more closely. Some are bubbling. Others are still as if brooding. You learn that colors can change in light, in air, in reaction to your mood, it seems. A brilliant blue might dry to a dusty teal. A crimson can turn rusty if you add too much iron. And sometimes, the most vibrant hues come from the grossest stuff, like crushed insects, rotten urine, or bits of animal bile. Henrik hands you a tunic and tells you to dye it. A layering trick to get a color that's richer, deeper. Don't rush, he warns. Color is like reputation. It clings. Later, a group of knights visits the shop. Their tabards are faded from campaign, but their heraldic colors must be exact. A squire lays out a swatch of gold cloth. Well, gold, in the poetic sense. It's actually dyed yellow with weld, and slightly green where it aged poorly. The knights mutter, not golden enough. One growls. Henrik adjusts his spectacles. Then I suggest you fight your wars more gently. The knights don't laugh, but you do. And speaking of wars, there's a quiet rumor that tailors sometimes used color to send messages. A rogue patch of blue in a rebel's tunic, a hidden red stitch in a spy's cloak. Was it real? Hard to say. But it sounds plausible enough to become truth. You work late into the evening, your fingers stained with blue, red, and something you really hope is just wine. The dye room quiets as the colors deepen on the line. You realize you've memorized more about the language of color than your own prayers. There's an old tale you overheard once. A tailor made a dress so brilliantly green, so unearthly in hue, that the lady who wore it disappeared into the forest and was never seen again. Taken by the fae? Someone said. Or maybe she just really hated her husband, said someone else. Either way, the dress remained. Color doesn't forget. You dream that night, in shades you can't quite name. You're halfway through a buttonhole when Henrik drops a bundle of sleeves onto your bench with a grunt. Detachables, he mutters. Again, you sigh. Sleeves, especially the fashionable, flirtatious, endlessly negotiable, detachable kind, have become the bane and the bread of your work. See, in the medieval world, sleeves are like text messages with excellent embroidery. They say what you can't say. Sometimes they scream it. Detachable sleeves serve two functions. One is practical. They let folks wash just the sleeves instead of the entire heavy tunic. The second, scandal, flirting, gossip, you name it. Giving someone your sleeve is the medieval equivalent of a wink, a love letter, and a scented candle all rolled into one. A young noblewoman visits the shop, veiled and flushed. She wants a pair of sleeves made from pale silk, embroidered with hawthorn blossoms and edged in gold thread. You ask her who they're for. She doesn't answer, just tucks a coin into your palm and says, "Make sure they fasten easily." You don't ask again. Later, Henrik leans over and says quietly, "Those will be thrown at a tournament next week." If her chosen knight catches them, he wears them tied to his arm. If he doesn't, she's marrying some baron with 3 teeth and a title. You keep sewing. The sleeves themselves are marvels of craftsmanship. Laced in at the shoulder or under the arm, they dangle like banners or cling like armor, depending on who's watching. And they're detachable for a reason. They make garment sharing easier. They hide sins. They let someone reinvent themselves between breakfast and vespers. There's a story among tailors of a thief who escaped capture by simply removing his embroidered sleeves, his most recognizable feature, and blending into a crowd wearing commoner's linen. Another tale tells of a widow who wore her husband's sleeves pinned to her gown for 7 years after his death. Henrik swears it's true, kept months in M2 probably. He adds, historians still argue whether detachable sleeves evolved for practicality or romance, or maybe espionage. You're beginning to suspect the answer is yes. To all of the above, you're asked to sew hidden fastenings into a pair of crimson sleeves. Tiny toggles, nearly invisible. For discretion, the client says. You don't ask, but you do note that the client also had you reinforce the upper seams, clearly planning for movement. Probably dancing. Possibly fleeing. Sleeves cross class lines more than most garments. A merchant's daughter might save for months to afford a pair of velvet sleeves with copper trim. A knight might spend half a campaign's pay for silk ones that match his beloved's ribbon. And a tailor's apprentice, well, you've never owned a pair. Your sleeves are stitched to your tunic, plain as porridge. Henrik lets you practice on scraps, though. You try out embroidered motifs, birds, leaves, stars. You learn which patterns mean what. A vine might symbolize growth. A lily means purity unless it's red, then it might mean passion. Or a monastery. Or both. Honestly, it's confusing, but also kind of fun. You test how the sleeves hang, how they swing when you walk, how they drape when you sit. You're startled by how much they change your silhouette, how you feel more confident. Then you remember the noblewoman's gaze as she held up the hawthorn, embroidered silk, and it clicks. These aren't just garments, they're declarations. Henrik's own sleeves are heavy wool, patched and stained, but the stitching is flawless. You ask him if he ever wore fancier ones. He snorts. Once. Court tailor job. Didn't like it. Too many peacocks. Not enough cloth. Still, you notice he keeps a pair of deep blue sleeves in a box at the back of the shop. He never talks about them. One rainy afternoon, a bard visits. His sleeves are wild, layers of green, slashed to show the red lining beneath. He plays a lute while Henrik takes his measurements, singing a bawdy ballad about a milkmaid and a knight who confused armor with amour. When he leaves, Henrik rolls his eyes but smiles faintly. Those sleeves will get him into trouble, he says. And probably out of it, too. You mend a sleeve torn in what was clearly a fight. Knife sliced, jagged. The client pays extra for matching thread. My wife mustn't know, he says. You consider pointing out the bloodstains on the cuffs, but think better of it. Sleeves are currency in some circles. Quite literally. You've seen them traded in taverns, pawned for bread, even used to pay off debts. In fact, a rival tailor once tried to launch a trend of pocket sleeves, with hidden compartments for coins and secrets. It didn't catch on, mostly because everyone kept losing their money in public. But you remember that concept as you help a young scribe design his first proper court tunic. Make the sleeves detachable, he says, eyes gleaming, so I can change them to match my mood. You grin. That could be dangerous. He grins back. Exactly. By twilight, you're stitching lace onto the edges of a set bound for a wedding. Delicate, lovely work. The kind that gets noticed. The kind that sparks rumors. And as the last thread pulls tight, you wonder what will these sleeves witness. You're squinting under candlelight, hunched over a hem so fine it feels more like performing surgery than sewing. Henrik, for once, doesn't scold you. He's watching too, his eyes sharp, because this hem isn't just decoration, it's deception. Check the fold. He murmurs. You lift the edge of the fabric carefully and find, Hidden between the stitches, a sliver of parchment. Folded tight, no wax seal, no signature. You look up, confused. Henrik just says, "Deliver it with the gown. Say nothing." And just like that, you're in it. Welcome to the unspoken world of tailoring espionage, where hems hide more than uneven stitching and poor posture. This, you now realize, is what separates true tailors from mere cloth merchants. Anyone can sew a tunic, but it takes nerve, subtlety, and an extremely steady hand to stitch secrets into a garment without anyone noticing. Some clients ask for love notes sewn into linings. Others prefer religious charms, bits of palm from Easter, or stitched in psalms for protection. One woman even requested a tiny pouch sewn inside her skirt hem, just big enough for a keepsake tooth from her dead dog. You didn't ask. Henrik calls them whispers. Tiny additions no one will ever see, unless they know exactly where to look. He shows you a row of cloaks with different linings. One hides a strip of red cloth, meant to signal safe passage to a rebel group. Another has beads sewn into a rhythmic pattern, possibly a cipher. Historians still argue whether tailors truly served as messengers for underground movements, or if this is all just fringe theory. Fringe. See what you did there. You recall a nobleman who insisted on a red thread sewn into his black mourning garb, barely visible. For her, he said, eyes misting. Even now. The entire court thought he was grieving his wife. Only you and the tailor knew he meant someone else, entirely. Even the act of hemming can be symbolic. Shortening a cloak, a sign of humility or shame. Lengthening a tunic past the legal limit. Defiance stitched in plain sight. And no one dares accuse a tailor outright, not without proof. Not when their own robes rely on the same hands. You spend days learning the secret stitch patterns. The bishop's cross, which allows a garment to be unpicked in seconds. The mirror hem, which hides a tiny folded space inside the fabric. The tailor's knot, which looks ordinary but unravels with a specific tug. Henrik once hid an entire letter inside the facing of a doublet collar. It passed through 3 kingdoms before being discovered, accidentally, when someone tried to re-starch it. You can't help but think, that's a pretty high-stakes laundry day. One day, you receive a cloak from a stranger. No name, just instructions reinforce the hem and return it by dusk. You do. Later that night, guards raid a merchant's house. You never find out why. But you check your stitches 3 times the next morning. And then there's the bribes. Some clients tip in coin, others in kind. But the boldest ones, they ask you to stitch favors into garments. Literal favors. Tokens meant to be found later by someone else. A ribbon with perfume, a signet ring. One time, a lock of hair so artfully hidden in a hat lining, even Henrik took a moment to admire the craftsmanship before frowning. "Hope he's worth it," he muttered. Tailors become confidants, whether they want to or not. You know who's expecting a child before their own spouse does, based on waist measurements. You know which young man keeps ordering new hose with reinforced seats, clearly spending too much time on horseback, or possibly falling off it. And sometimes, the secrets are darker. A priest's robe arrives, soaked near the hem. Wine, he claims. You're not convinced. When you unstitch the lower lining, you find a scrap of cloth from another robe, stained. You return the garment without a word. Henrik burns the leftover fabric. You wonder, how many crimes are hemmed away, never to be found? How many silent warnings pass hands as lining, as trim, as buttons shaped like sigils? You begin to understand why tailors are both trusted and feared. Your scissors can snip thread, or cut ties. Your stitches can mend, or expose. You can make someone noble, humble, alluring, or invisible. One evening, a girl no older than 10 comes in, holding her father's cloak. "Has gone?" she whispers. "But he said to fix the hem." You nod. You work, and there inside the lining you find a tiny stitched heart. Just the outline, nothing else. No words. But it stops you for a moment. You reinforce the cloak. You don't mention the heart. She thanks you, clutching it close. As she walks away, you realize some hems aren't hiding anything. They're holding on. The shop is oddly quiet today, save for the rhythmic snip of shears and the creak of the sign swaying in the wind outside. Henrik hands you a bundle of old cloth and a battered box of tools. Today, he says, you learned to speak Tailor. You frown. Didn't I already? He grins. Not out loud. Turns out, tailors have their own language, not just in how they cut and stitch, but in how they talk. A curious blend of slang, code words, gestures, and tool placement. It's a dialect that slips between needle and thread, hidden from ears that don't belong. You start with the basics. A double tap of scissors on the bench means client incoming. Holding the shears with the blades up, that's a signal for dangerous or noble. Maybe both. Laying a chalk line and then tapping it twice. They don't know their real measurements. Handle gently. And then there are the terms. Fat cloth doesn't mean thick. It means expensive. Scorn stitch refers to a quick patch job done out of spite or protest. Fox seam. That's a fake seam added to make a garment look more complex than it is, usually to justify a higher price. And if someone says you've done a ghost hem, congratulations, it's nearly invisible and very, very good. There's a whole lexicon just for clients. Wool whisper is a rich one who pretends to understand fabric. Sleeve hunter is anyone overly obsessed with detachable styles, usually romantics or spies. Pin dancer, someone fidgety who hates being measured. You meet 3 of those a week. Henrik shows you his personal shorthand too. Small chalk marks he uses to communicate with other tailors. An asterisk hidden in a seam allowance means rush order. A slash through a pocket square sketch means client may not return. Ask no questions. One time, you spot a star enclosed in a box. What's that? You ask. Henrik sighs. That means the client talks too much. You love it instantly. It's like being part of a secret guild within a guild. Not just the making of clothes, but the passing of messages, some of them stitched, some spoken, and some never spoken at all. Tools, too, become part of the language. Laying the shears blade down across the table is a sign of trust. Leaving a needle stuck in the arm of a mannequin points to a mistake somewhere in the garment. And pins. Tailors use them like exclamation marks, clustered on one shoulder. Means redo that seam, left in a collar. Warning client will nitpick that part. There's a story Henrik tells you. Back during a plague outbreak, tailors in Milan used specific folds in the fabric to signal whether the household had been touched by illness. 1 extra pleat over the right shoulder. 2 if someone had died. No one spoke about it, but everyone knew. Better than a quarantine flag. Henrik mutters. Historians still argue whether these kinds of silent signals were widespread or just local legend. But you're surrounded by the system every day, and it's very real. A tailor in Bruges once left chalk symbols in fabric patterns to warn of theft-prone clients. Another in Paris claimed his button spacing doubled as calendar markers for his secret meetings. True. Who knows? But tailors are clever. They hide truths in plain sight. One day, a foreign client arrives. Nervous, flustered, not fluent in the local tongue. He gestures toward a sketch and says, like this, but safer. Henrik glances at you and raises one brow. You mark the inside seam with a triple dot and a small cross. Tailor shorthand for garment meant to conceal. You add extra room in the lining. He doesn't thank you. He just pays in exact coin and leaves without looking back. Then there's the tailor's lullaby. Old songs whispered while working, meant to pass on rules, rhymes, even gossip. One goes, thread to the left means lover's regret, thread to the right means new moon set. Buttons 3 say don't forget, while buttons 4 mean not just yet. You hum it without thinking. Even as you cut a doublet for a young groom, his betrothed sent a note with his measurements and a swatch of blue ribbon. No words, just the ribbon. Henrik says, sapphire shade. Trust her. Not all code is secret. Some is intimate. A tailor might sew a crescent pattern into the hem of a bride's dress, not because it's trendy, but because her mother wore the same. A tiny cross in the seam of a cloak might mark a pilgrimage taken, or one promised. These details aren't requested, they're understood. Tailors listen with more than ears. One evening, you try it yourself. A poor farmer orders a cloak for winter, plainly cut, scratchy wool, nothing special. But you stitch a small mountain-shaped pattern into the hem, barely visible. You'd heard him talk about missing the hills of his youth. He never mentions it. But next time he visits, he brings you honey cakes. This, you think, is the true tailor's language. One stitch for warmth, one for memory, one for hope. You start noticing them everywhere. Quiet patterns in other tailors' work. A row of uneven stitches in an otherwise perfect tunic. Intentional. Always intentional. And maybe that's why tailors seem so calm. Because even when the world's loud, they're fluent in silence. The bells ring from the chapel tower, and Henrik doesn't even flinch. He's focused on the row of livery coats sprawled across the bench like obedient soldiers awaiting inspection. 12, he mutters. All identical. All technically illegal. You blink. They look fine to me. Henrik snorts. They are fine. That's the problem. Today, you're learning about livery. The uniforms worn by a noble household's retainers, servants, and hangers-on. On the surface, they seem practical, matching tunics in household colors, crests stitched over the heart, functional cuts for moving, lifting, guarding. But behind every matching sleeve lies a quiet rebellion. Because sumptuary laws, the great big medieval, do not wear what isn't yours. Rule book. Don't apply to livery in the same way. A servant in crimson might be flaunting color normally reserved for royalty, but if he's in livery, it's allowed. Protected, even. Under the household banner, anything goes. Which means tailors, clever as always, exploit the livery loophole, like children spotting an open pantry. You're hemming a doublet when a merchant barges in, dressed in the liveried colors of Lord Edivane, a man with more enemies than livestock. The merchant is not, by any stretch of logic, in Edivane's service. But the outfit? Immaculate? Tell your master I'm ready for the new commission. The merchant declares loudly, catching the eye of a passing neighbor. Henrik merely nods. When the man leaves, he mutters, not the first. Won't be the last. Turns out, people hire tailors to make fake liveries. Not forged exactly, but suggestive. Just similar enough to the real thing to imply connection. Wealth, status. It's not illegal. Not quite. But it's deeply frowned upon by the actual households, whose liveries are being, shall we say, echoed. Some tailors get clever with it. A stripe in a different direction. One fewer button. A slightly off crest. What looks like a lion is really a dog, if you squint. Henrik calls it inspired design. You call it bold. Historians still argue whether this was rampant deception or just a natural outcome of rigid dress codes. But in your needle, pricked hands, the difference feels razor thin. One lady orders a cloak in the same green as House Vellerst, but no crest, of course. You match the dye carefully, wondering what kind of invitation she hopes to earn or discourage. Sometimes, fashion is less about inclusion and more about strategic ambiguity. You learn to ask the right questions without asking anything at all. Do you want this fastened with toggles or laces? You'll say while really meaning, do you want this to look official or just rich? There's a special name for the ones who abuse this system. Bannerhawks. Henrik calls them. People who flit from one lord's colors to another, never actually serving anyone, just collecting connections. One even commissions a new cloak each season, always in the colors of whoever's politically rising. He tips well. You don't like him. But not all livery is for climbing ladders. A boy comes in with a frayed tunic, threadbare, bearing a faded emblem. He asks you to repair it, not because he serves that house anymore, but because his father did. It's the only thing I have left of him, he says, You patch it carefully. Henrik doesn't charge. Some houses weaponize livery. Lord Relland's household once commissioned 60 new cloaks in deep blue trimmed with white, and made his guards parade through the city all week, a declaration of strength, loyalty, reach. But the cloth was thin, cheaply dyed. The white trim turned gray after one rainstorm. Relland became a joke in 3 markets. You stitch one such livery coat, then another. The repetition is oddly meditative, but each one is a whisper of politics. Livery carries weight. If you're seen in a household's colors, people assume things: where you stand, who you serve, what you believe, and if you wear those colors without permission. Well, some mistakes don't wash out. Henrik tells you about a tailor in Bristol who made livery cloaks for both sides of a brewing noble feud. He thought he was being neutral. The feud escalated. One lord died. The tailor fled. His shop now makes aprons exclusively. You start noticing the subtle livery mimicry around town. A brewer's daughter wearing a shawl in baronial red. A baker whose sleeves are cuffed like a knight's page. Not illegal, no. But not innocent either. Sometimes, livery hides more than status. Once, a messenger arrives in a cloak from the House of Marrow. You open the lining and find a stitch message. Coordinates, likely. Henrik sends him on his way without a word. The irony. Livery was meant to bring order, clarity. One look, and you'd know who served whom. But now it's a fashion battlefield. A form of camouflage. A performance. And tailors like you. You're the playwrights, the costumers, the quiet conspirators. By candlelight, you finish a final coat. This one is real, commissioned directly by the household. Sturdy wool, honest stitching. You sew the crest carefully, each line exact. No symbols, no tricks, no lies. Sometimes a coat is just a coat, but you know better. The guild hall smells like waxed wood, pipes smoke, and just a hint of mothballs, probably from Master Albin's 3th-century old ceremonial robe, which he insists on wearing for tradition. You trail behind Henrik, trying not to trip on the deep, piled carpet as you step into the most sacred and secretly gossip. Laden Place a tailor can be the guild of needle and shear. This is where rivalries simmer, behind polite nods, where scissors gleam like dueling swords, and where every tailor pretends not to judge your top stitching, while absolutely judging your top stitching. Welcome to the Inner Sanctum. Tonight's meeting is about gold thread. Specifically, who gets to use it, how much, and whether Guild Chapter 3 Article 17 needs revising again. Likely because someone's been too generous with their gilded seams. You take a seat beside Henrik, your eyes drawn to the decorative doublet worn by Mistress Leona. Gold filigree at the cuffs, golden embroidery along the hem. Technically allowable if you're a guild master. The rumor, however, is that she threads her name into every piece she makes using a hair, thin gold stitch, visible only if you flip the lining and squint, keeps the counterfeits from claiming credit, she once said. Guild meetings are a blend of policy and passive aggression. The chair opens with a reminder that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Unless it involves stealing designs, then it's called pattern piracy, a term the guild just invented, and everyone is already pretending to understand. You're here mostly to observe, but that doesn't stop Henrik from whispering commentary in your ear. See that coat? He nods toward a flamboyant, young tailor across the room. Trimmed in Florentine lace. Costs more than his rent. Probably got it to impress Leona. She's been widowed 5 years, so he's about 4 years too late. You stifle a laugh, adjusting your collar. 'Cause appearances matter here. Not just what you wear, but how you wear it, how you sit, how your scissors hang from your belt. Too low means lazy. Too high means arrogant. The guild is also where you learn the darker side of tailoring commerce. Bribery isn't common, but it happens, especially for royal contracts. Henrik once lost a commission to a tailor who offered free linings for life to a certain baroness. He sues for her lapdog now. Henrik grumbles. Still, this hall is where decisions get made. which dyes are allowed, what stitching methods define professional standard, and who gets to call themselves master tailor. That last one, blood sport. To earn your master title, you must submit a masterpiece, a complete garment made by hand, demonstrating every required skill, fit, finish, creativity, and, ideally, a little flair. Your stomach knots just thinking about it. Henrik pats your arm, still a few years off. But you'll need your signature. Tailor signatures. Tiny, hidden marks left in garments are part branding, part insurance. A mismatched stitch in an invisible place. A unique knot. Some tailors use perfume. Others, an unusual dye that only shows under candlelight. You start brainstorming yours. A stitch shaped like a quill. A lining pattern that's always prime numbers. The possibilities feel strangely intimate. One guild member stands to present a petition. Too many apprentices are making subpar linings. He proposes a test. Apprentices must sew a full lining with 0 visible stitches. Henrik mutters, "Next, they'll ask us to stitch underwater." Someone else suggests we limit access to gold thread entirely, reserving it for royal or sacred commissions. You watch Mistress Leona stiffen. Someone coughs. The proposal is table, stitched, so that is buried politely. Historians still argue whether tailoring guilds were protective forces of craft integrity, or just snobbish cartels with good lighting. But inside this room, you see both. They fight for fair pricing and honest apprenticeship. Yes, but they also squabble over who got invited to the Archbishop's latest fitting. During break, you hover near the biscuit table and overhear 2 journeymen whispering about a scandal in the northern chapter. Something about misused crimson dye funds and a misdelivered pair of embroidered hose. You catch the phrase, "He stitched her initials right on the gusset," before they notice you listening and scatter like tailor birds. Back at your bench the next morning, you feel the ripple effect of the guild hall. Prices shift subtly. A new sleeve flare catches on. Clients ask about Florentine folds they'd never heard of last week. Trends often start in whispers over guild wine. You begin to understand how important this network is. The gossip, the grudges, the decisions, it all shapes the craft. And the garments that shape people. Henrik hands you a coat and says, "Fix the gold trim." Too much, you pause. Guild rules, he nods. And the client's getting smug. You trim the embroidery, leaving just enough to suggest wealth, not flaunt it. Gold thread, after all, draws eyes. And enemies. That night, you stitch your first secret mark into a lining. Just a loop, your loop. It's not much, but it's yours. The workshop is quiet, except for the faint click of your needle and the soft whisper of wool slipping through your fingers. You're working on a surcoat with subtle embroidery. Nothing flashy, just enough flourish to suggest importance. "This one's for negotiation," Henrik says. "So mind the seams." You nod. You've learned that certain garments aren't for comfort, warmth, or even fashion. They're for leverage. Today, you're stitching politics, courtship, even vengeance. The client is a minor noble named Sir Renfred. His message is clear. He's proposing marriage, but not with flowers or poetry. He's proposing with a coat, his would-be bride, daughter of a rival house. The stitching must imply strength but softness, wealth but restraint, romantic interest, yes, but only if the dowry's right. This is not your average tailoring. You embroider ivy down the sides, a subtle nod to loyalty and growth. But Henrik stops you. "Thorns too?" he says. Remind her he's not desperate. You add a few, just visible in candlelight. When Sir Renfred tries it on, he looks at himself in the mirror for a full minute before saying, "Yes, this will do." You nod silently, knowing full well the surcoat may carry more weight than the man inside it. In the weeks that follow, more such garments pass through your hands. A velvet tunic designed for a tense land negotiation. Subtle red trim, added to a merchant's otherwise sober gray, meant to signal rising power. A widow's new gown lined with silver thread. In memory. but you both know it's also a reminder of the late husband's debts, soon to be settled with a new alliance. Tailoring, you realize, is like chess with needles. And then come the revenge stitches. One woman, Lady Callus, orders a new overdress. She wants something sharp, structured, commanding, she says. You make it with bone, stiffened pleats and sleeves wide enough to slap someone just by turning around. Hidden inside the hem. A woven phrase, he lied. In Latin, classy. Tailors have long played this role. Silent participants in public drama. Historians still argue whether they shaped events or merely reflected them. But you've now sewn garments that changed lives. That carried proposals, ended feuds, declared intentions. You've begun to read people's requests not as orders, but as emotional confessions. There's a noblewoman who returns again and again, each time with vague requests for traveling cloaks. Always thick, dark, unassuming, always with deep hidden pockets. One day she asks for something, suitable for mourning. No name mentioned. You understand anyway. You add a row of tiny black buttons, 17 in all. You don't ask why. And then there's the gesture. Loud, clanging, insistent on stripes and clashing colors. I want them to see me, he says. But when you turn his garment inside out, you find he's requested silk linings in solid black. Comfort, he claims. You suspect otherwise. You start to enjoy the challenge. A merchant's wife wants a gown to help her look both pious and profitable. You embroider small wheat sheaves into the lower hem. Fertility? She asks. Commerce, you say. She smiles. A pair of brothers come in arguing over a shared inheritance. One commissions a tunic with boar's tusks embroidered in the collar. A family crest. The other returns days later, demanding a doublet with a lion on the chest. Bigger than his. You oblige but place it off-center. To make a point, once, a local midwife visits. Short, round, sharp-eyed. She orders a cloak with room to move. You give her deep, easy folds and an extra slit pocket just big enough for herbs. Or maybe something sharper. You don't ask. You learn that sometimes negotiation happens through presence. One woman orders a robe just to walk past her rival in church. She'll see, she says. You don't know what. But you make sure the light catches the lining at exactly the right angle as she walks. You even stitch garments for children being paraded before potential guardians. Innocent little tunics, made of the finest linen a guardian can barely afford. The message is simple: I am valuable. Take care of me. And there's a dark side too. You once stitched a man's new coat for a court appearance. He was accused of theft, wanted something sober, clean, respectable. You added blue trim, calm, trustworthy. He left the shop looking like innocence stitched into human form. The next day, you learn he was convicted anyway. Henrik says nothing, just crosses a name off the order ledger with an ink blot thick enough to seep through the page. Tailors are witnesses to it all. Joy, sorrow, pride, manipulation. Some garments hold celebrations. Others are wearable arguments. And some carry stories too subtle for words. One rainy evening, a girl returns with a dress you made her for her betrothal. The marriage fell through. She wants it altered. You do. Quietly, you move the decorative stitching from the hem to the neckline. New purpose. New chapter. She leaves smiling. You sit by the window, watching the drops bead on the glass. Another tunic waits on the bench. Another coat, another request. Another negotiation in thread. And as you pick up your needle, you wonder what story will this one whisper. You're up to your elbows in cassock fabric, your hands buried in folds of holy wool, when Henrik lets out a long sigh. Clergy commissions, he mutters. They always smell faintly of incense and scandal. The church may preach humility, but their garments say otherwise. From lavish copes to embroidered stoles, ecclesiastical fashion is a battlefield of symbols, status. When no one's looking, a touch of theatrical flair. You're tasked today with a new alb for a canon known for his fairy sermons and not so fiery temper. Stitch it wide at the sleeves, Henrik instructs, unhigh at the neck. He likes to look holier than everyone else. Don't forget the gold cross on the chest. You pause. Thread or applique? Henrik grins. Thread. Subtle arrogance. Religious garments aren't just decorative. They're declarations of rank, purity, office, and sometimes pure ambition. The length of a chasuble, the fringe on a maniple, the drape of a stole. Each element communicates something. You've seen priests in threadbare robes that scream piety, and bishops in robes so elaborate they might as well ring when they walk. And the tailors behind them, walking tightropes of symbolism. You stitch white linen, soft and unassuming, but you know the symbolism it carries: purity, rebirth, light. You edge it with gold thread, not too much lest it tip into vanity. The balance is delicate. Too plain and the canon looks poor. Too rich and he risks drawing the bishop's envy. Henrik tells you a tale of a tailor who sewed a bishop's robe with red silk linings. Royal, yes, but also dangerously close to heretical in certain corners of the realm. Got him exiled, Henrik says. The tailor, not the bishop. Figures? Historians still argue whether church tailors wielded quiet influence or merely obeyed holy orders. But when you're the one stitching the hem on a robe meant to open synods or crown kings, you feel the weight of it. You learn quickly that certain colors are sacred. Purple, true imperial purple, is reserved for high church and royalty. Blue, traditionally linked to the Virgin Mary, must be a very specific hue, or else someone's going to write an angry letter in Latin. Red. Blood of the martyrs. Green. Ordinary time. Yes, even the calendar has a wardrobe. You're handed a request from a friar who wants his habit simpler. Henrik frowns. Simpler than undyed wool and no fasteners. But you manage to tweak the cut. Less volume in the back, a slightly narrower hood. It's cleaner. Leaner. Humility with tailoring. You joke. The friar laughs, but pays in mushrooms. You don't ask. Sometimes you wonder if the garments are for God at all. A visiting cardinal once brought his own tailor. Silk, velvet, trim so ornate it could fund a school. The cardinal's retinue claimed it was to honor the divine. Henrik whispered, to honor his reflection. Maybe. And yet some truly humble men walked through the door. A wandering preacher with a robe mended 7 times. He asked only that the sleeves be reinforced for travel. You use double thread, quietly adding a cross stitch inside the collar. Not for show, just to protect him. There's power in these seams. You've seen priests step into their vestments and transform. They straighten. They grow taller, louder. The robes do half the preaching. Especially during processions, robes swaying, glinting in the sun, part sacred rite, part performance art. You stitch a stole for a young priest who wants lilies along the border. My mother's favorite flower, he explains. You smile and embroider them carefully. When he returns, his eyes shine. It's perfect, he says. She'll be proud. You nod, knowing she's gone. You stitched her name in the hem just once. Not for him, for her. But the clergy can be as political as any court. One bishop demands a robe longer than his rivals. A deacon insists on gold trim, blessed at the abbey, which just happens to be more luminous than the archdeacon's. You comply. Silently. One robe you work on for days. Dark purple, heavy, layered with symbolism. You line the inside with cream, colored linen. A contrast only the wearer will see. Henrik says, to remind him he's still human. And then there are the funerals. You stitch a black pall for a deceased abbot. The cloth is simple. The trim, perfectly even. No symbolism. Just gravity. As you press the final seam, you realize not all church garments are meant for glory. Some are just for goodbye. Still, there's joy too. A novice gets his first robe. He grins, nervous and proud. You make sure it fits perfectly. Add a tiny prayer stitch under the cuff. Your own habit now. You step back as he twirls, awkward and delighted. Henrik smiles. Sometimes, kid, the robe fits the soul. You're squinting at a bolt of shimmering fabric that looks like it might cost more than your entire workshop when Henrik whispers, fake. You blink. but it's beautiful. He shrugs. So's a painted window. Doesn't mean it'll keep out the wind. Today, you meet the shadowy side of tailoring, the art of the fashionable fake. Fox velvets, imitation silks, and gold thread that's more wish than metal. And right now, you're about to help create something that looks like a king's cloak, but costs less than a goose. Henrik opens a box of trim. Some is genuine, coiled gold wire, delicate and heavy. Some, well, you tap it and it echoes like a bell made from spoons. He points to a spool of copper alloy thread. It tarnishes fast, he warns, but for 3 days you'll look like a duke. In medieval cities, where wealth is often counted in cloth rather than coin, the right outfit can open doors, start rumors, or prevent very unfortunate duels, which means tailors are regularly asked to create illusions. The trick? Know just how far you can push before the illusion cracks. You help prepare a tunic for a minor official who wants to impress the city council. He can't afford real brocade, so you stencil a repeating pattern with metallic paint, then stitch along the lines with fake thread. From 5 feet away, he could pass for nobility. Closer than that, let's hope no one's squinting. He leaves satisfied. And you? You're a little proud of the deception. Not everyone is fooled, of course. The truly wealthy can spot fake damask in a heartbeat, but sometimes they choose to wear it, especially if they're attending events in less than friendly towns. No sense flaunting real wealth where knives are common and lighting is bad. There's a story in the guild. A court tailor once made a robe for a visiting duke entirely from repurposed drapes. Looked magnificent. Cost pennies. The duke was none the wiser, and wore it to 3 ceremonies before his wife noticed the pattern matched the castle curtains. Historians still argue whether tailors were innocent artisans or willing conspirators in this world of deceit. But when you're stitching a golden hem out of dipped linen and powdered glue, you begin to see the blurred line between craft and con. You repair a surcoat that looks like silk but frays like straw. What is this? You ask. Henrik inspects the weave. Silk waste mixed with nettle fibers. A merchant trick. Doesn't last, but it shines when it needs to. Some tailors specialize in this kind of fakery. You've heard of one in Lyon who sews entire outfits from painted paper and goose feathers, meant for masquerades and quick getaways. Another, in Venice, mixes beetle shells into the dye to mimic opal silk. Shimmers like water, they say. You begin experimenting. You stitch mirrored glass beads into a collar for a performer. Cheap, heavy, but dazzling onstage. You dye a belt with onion skins and iron to mimic rare ochre. You even sew a doublet using dyed cotton meant to mimic imported wool. The client? Thrilled. But there are risks. A merchant once wore imitation satin to a royal feast. When the queen noticed the fraying edges, he was quietly escorted out. His tailor, blacklisted, permanently. So you learn the balance. Where to place the best trim, at eye level. Where to hide the cheap cloth, under layers. How to line a cloak with a flash of color to distract from the fact that the outer layer is 2 seasons out of date. Sometimes, it's not even deception. It's survival. You help a poor widow prepare for her daughter's wedding. She can't afford fine fabric, so you use simple cloth, but cut it well, press every seam, and add a small brooch, shiny but worthless. When the guests arrive, no one questions her status. That's tailoring. That's dignity. Then there are the forgeries. One evening, you're asked to copy a bishop's vestment. Exactly. Down to the threads. Henrik refuses. That's not illusion, he says. That's treason. But a week later, someone commissions a tunic, inspired by the royal livery. You tone down the colors, switch the crest slightly, and sew it with just enough flair to hint, but never state. That's the dance. You hint. You imply, but never claim. Tailors become silent navigators in a sea of ambition. You learn how to elevate without lying. How to flatter without falsehood. But yes, occasionally you help someone appear slightly more illustrious than they technically are. One client insists He's been knighted, despite having hands softer than your mother's bread dough. He wants hose, fit for a champion. You oblige, with thicker seams to avoid splitting when he inevitably tries to ride a horse. Later, a young poet wants a robe to perform in. Something with drama, he says. You use cheap velvet and a recycled train from an old bridal gown. He weeps when he sees it. I look like a vision, he says. You don't tell him about the wine stain under the left sleeve. Not all fashion lies are wicked. Some are wishes stitched into shape, hopes made visible just long enough to catch the right eye. And in that moment, for that dance, that speech, that risk, they're real. The shop is unusually quiet this morning, filled with the soft scrape of broom bristles and the hiss of steam rising from the pressing pot. Henrik finally speaks. It's time. You freeze mid-stitch, needle dangling. Time for what? He places a pair of iron shears in your hands. Well used, their handles worn smooth, their blades still sharp enough to shave thread from thread. Your oath, he says. We don't just cut cloth. We cut paths. You are about to become an official apprentice of the guild. Not just by years of work or whispered secrets, but through ritual, an age-old ceremony passed down stitch by stitch. You follow Henrik to the back of the shop into a room you've never seen unlocked before. It smells of cedar and ink and candle smoke. On a small table lies an open book, its pages filled with names, signatures, little symbols you now recognize. Tailor marks, guild crests, family stitches. Next to it rests a folded square of deep indigo wool, a spool of white silk thread, and a thimble that's older than anyone living. Henrik hands you the needle. Sew your mark into this cloth, he says. No one watches, no one helps. Your hands tremble a little, but your needle doesn't falter. You stitch your signature loop, the one you've practiced in secret, the one you've hidden in linings and hems for months. A single, deliberate spiral. When it's done, Henrik nods. You're ready? The oath itself is short, old, and kind of cryptic. You speak it aloud, be thread and cut, by stitch and cloth. I swear to serve truth in form, honesty in measure, and silence in secrets. Then you press the shears closed with both hands. It is symbolic, yes, but the weight is real. So is the moment. You're now an apprentice in full, which means more work. Apprenticeship isn't glamorous. It's not silk and song, it's mending cuffs until your eyes blur, mixing dyes that smell like death and dishwater, and cutting fabric under pressure that would buckle a bridge. But now you're allowed in the guild alone. You're permitted to take minor commissions. You even get your own tailor's hook, a small curved iron tool you immediately stab into your thumb. Initiation complete. You begin seeing younger children brought in, bright-eyed and full of questions you only recently asked yourself. You answer them gently. That's part of the oath too. Knowledge passed down, not hoarded. Your first independent job is repairing a journeyman's cloak. The lining's ripped, the collar faded, but the weave is fine. You reinforce it, add a discreet pleat to hide the wear, and stitch a tiny sunburst into the inner seam. Not required, but it's yours. And then comes your test. A noble commissions you directly, without Henrik. He wants a doublet for a festival. Tight fit, wide shoulders, dramatic cuffs. It must impress, he says, but not overshadow. A tricky ask. You design the cut with care, consult old patterns, choose cloth that suggests wealth, but not vulgarity. You work for days, losing sleep, rechecking measurements obsessively. When he finally tries it on, he smiles, half shocked. You've got the eye, he says. Henrik simply says, you didn't use the flattery tape. I'm proud. Historians still argue whether apprentice oaths truly meant anything, whether they bound young tailors to a code, or simply served as gatekeeping rituals. But to you, the oath feels alive. Every time you sew a clean hem, every time you keep a client's secret, you feel it whisper under your breath. There are other apprentices, too, from other workshops. You meet them at guild events, in fabric markets, once even at a tavern brawl over who invented the hidden button loop. You learn fast that competition runs deep. So does camaraderie. One night, another apprentice, Milo, shows you his signature stitch, a twist shaped like a flame. I hide it in every left sleeve, he says, so if anyone steals my work, I'll know. You share your loop. Neither of you says it aloud, but you know you've made a friend. In a trade that runs on secrecy, that's a rare thing. And of course, not all apprentices thrive. One boy quits after 3 weeks. Can't stand the blood, he says. Another gets caught stealing thread, exiled from the guild. Not for the loss, thread's cheap, but for the breach of trust. You pass the shop one day and see your name, listed next to a client's order in Henrik's ledger. It stops you cold. Just ink. But it feels like brass, like a key turning. Later that week, you stitch your loop into a gown worn by a merchant's daughter. She smiles at herself in the mirror and says, I look like who I'm meant to be. You nod and bow slightly, because that's what tailors do. We don't just sew clothes. We shape how people see themselves, how they're seen by the world, how they endure, declare, transform. You walk home that night tired, sore, with thread caught in your cuffs and dye under your nails. You've never been prouder. You're stitching by moonlight again. This time not for fashion, nor for ceremony, but for something far more dangerous. The request came in quiet and wrapped in ambiguity. Something light? The client said. Dark in color, easy to move in, and roomy enough for documents. Henrik only raised an eyebrow when you told him. Keep the stitches tight, he said, and the questions to yourself. Tonight, you're tailoring for a spy. You've heard whispers, of course, stories passed down in the guild of garments made not just for warmth or rank, but for secrets, sabotage, and silent movements. Tailors like you don't just touch history. Sometimes they thread through it like ghost stitches. This coat you're working on, it's black, naturally, but matty, meant to avoid catching light. The hem is weighted just slightly to keep it from flapping in wind. The collar is high, the seams curve to hug the body and minimize bulk. Hidden inside, pockets. 5 of them. 3 visible, 2 not. You stitch the invisible ones into the lining, then cover the entry point with a false seam. Anyone glancing inside would find nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, you place a final stitch into the shoulder. Your loop, tucked beside a reinforcing knot. You don't know the man's real name, but you suspect he won't wear this just for warmth. Historians still argue whether tailors actively participated in espionage or were just convenient artisans in the right or wrong place. But you've now made garments for messengers, scouts, and couriers who ask too few questions and tip too well. Coin wrapped in wax cloth. No names, no addresses. Just have it ready before sundown. One woman asks for a robe with tier, away sleeves. Another for boots with hollowed soles. One man, pale and quiet, requests a cloak that can turn inside out, one side brown, the other gray. For travel, he says. You don't argue. Henrik tells you about a tailor who designed reversible surcoats for soldiers posing as monks. He was never caught, but he also vanished after the war. Probably smart. Henrik says, sometimes the garments themselves become messages. A sash sewn with specific knots, 3 tight, 1 loose, could signal danger. A cloak embroidered only on one side might mean safe passage. There's even rumor of a code based on button placement. Left, over, right for allies, right over, left for spies. It sounds fanciful. Until a visiting diplomat's doublet uses that very pattern, and you're asked to repair it twice in 1 week. You tailor a gown for a noblewoman rumored to be passing secrets through tapestries. Her dress is exquisite. Deep blue with silver trim, lined in heavy damask, but the sleeves are detachable, and the seam beneath the left arm is triple, stitched with something far heavier than silk. You say nothing. She doesn't ask. Sometimes, the danger is closer. A captain enters the shop in full armor, requests a surcoat to wear over it. Something grand, he says, but it must tear easily. You raise an eyebrow. He grins grimly. In case I need to play dead. You give him crimson trim. Hard to fake blood on a red hem. And then there's the whispered tale of a tailor who used dye to pass warnings. Blue for safe, green for weight, brown for abort. The catch: the garments had to be worn on a specific day, in specific light, for the dye to show its meaning. Did it work? Who knows? But tailors like stories, especially ones that involve cleverness and cloak swishing. You begin to recognize the patterns of tension in your clients. The way their eyes scan the corners. Their shoulders tight under simple requests. You tailor accordingly. Breathable cloth for long flights. Reinforced seams for hidden weapons. Even garments designed to come apart at a tug. Escape seams. One man asks you to line his tunic with 2 layers of wool. It muffles the sound. He explains, then smiles. Off coin. Or blades. You don't comment. And not all your clients are heroes. You tailor a coat for a charming noble who, rumor claims, is leaking court secrets to foreign powers. His measurements are perfect. His posture impeccable. But when he tries on the final garment, you see the flicker of calculation in his eyes. Henrik doesn't ask who he is. Doesn't need to. Make sure the threads hold, is all he says. You do. One evening, you spot someone in the market wearing a cloak you made. It's been turned inside out. The color is wrong for the season. His eyes meet yours for a moment, then he disappears into the crowd. Was he using it as a signal? A warning? A simple mistake? You'll never know. That's part of the work. Tailoring, you now see, is a profession of layers. Fabric, of course. And politics. And intent. Every cut you make could serve a dozen purposes. Some noble, some dark, some neither. You lay down your shears after midnight, your fingers sore, your mind humming. On the bench sits another dark coat. Pockets hidden, seams precise. It'll be picked up by dawn. You may never see it again. Never know what it carried, who wore it, or what happened when they did. But your loop is there, your mark, your oath, and that
As always is enough.
The shop is quiet now, not in the way of urgent silences or muffled tension, but in the warm hush of evening, when the fire's low and the threads have all been tied. Henrik snores gently in his chair. The last of the day's clients is long gone. And you? You're alone with the sound of your needle passing through cloth. A metronome of memory. Tonight's garment isn't for a lord, or a bishop, or a merchant who smells faintly of dried figs and delusions of grandeur. No, it's for an old woman who brought in a shawl so worn it was nearly missed. Just patch the holes, she said. Doesn't have to be pretty. You intend to do more than that. You stitch slowly, reverently, folding old fabric into new shapes, strengthening it with subtle seams and a touch of soft wool. The work is simple. The moment, not. Because it hits you, this is the final stitch. Not just of the night, but of the years that shaped you. From apprentice to artisan, from child threading crooked loops into scraps to craftsman trusted with wedding gowns, funeral cloaks, secrets, and dreams. The room glows gold from a single candle. Its flicker plays across the shears on the bench. Your shears now. The loop on the shawl's edge is quiet, tidy, yours. Not a signature. A whisper. You pause, remembering faces. The page with padded shoulders, the noble with coated hems, the jester with mirrored beads and hidden grief, the lover who gave sleeves as confessions, the rebel cloaked in escape seams, the child whose hem held her father's farewell. You stitch them all. Wove their wishes, fears, ambitions into every dart, every fold. Sometimes they knew, often they didn't. Historians still argue whether tailors were mere craftsmen or silent keepers of power. But you saw the changes. You made them. A doublet can turn a pauper into a prince, at least long enough to speak. A robe can carry grief with grace. A sleeve can be a letter. A stitch can be a stand. You fold the shawl carefully and place it by the door. She'll pick it up tomorrow. She won't see the added lining or the reinforced edge, but she'll feel the warmth. Your hands rest on the bench. No more orders. No more urgent fittings, just stillness. Henrik stirs. You done? You nod? Good. He rubs his eyes. Then you can lock up. You do. You douse the fire, tighten the bolts, wrap your work apron one last time. The street outside is misty, the cobblestones silvered with dew. You step out into the hush, feeling the cool air settle around your shoulders. And somewhere, someone is walking beneath a cloak you made. Perhaps speaking lines stitched into their hem, or moving with confidence borrowed from your thread. You don't need thanks. You have the silence, the stitch, the secret. Now take a deep breath. Let the workshop dim behind your eyelids. The candlelight soft, the wooden floor cool beneath your feet. The scent of wool and cedar drifts through the air, and the quiet hum of the city beyond the shutters fades gently into the background. The threads are still. The shears rest. The mannequins stand watch like loyal sentries. Feel your heartbeat slow as the final hem folds neatly beneath your fingers. Nothing rushed now. No more patterns to match, no more cloaks to pin. Just the comfort of cloth, soft and warm, pressed against the rhythm of rest. Maybe you picture yourself there, in that small shop, wrapped in a simple robe stitched just for you, lined with silence, edged with ease, fitted perfectly to the shape of sleep. No lace, no buttons, no worry about seams or stains. Only breath, only peace. The city's bells ring softly somewhere far off, barely reaching your window. Let that be the last sound. Let it carry the day away, the way a loose thread slips quietly from a spool. You've walked through fabric markets, cut collars for kings, sewn messages into hems and promises into pleats. You've hemmed stories into every stitch, and now the story rests. So breathe in. As you breathe out, release it all. The bustle, the chatter, the needle's tug. You've reached the final stitch. Sleep now. You've earned it.